Hello and welcome to a Tolbert Music tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about the violin, everything that you need to know as a new beginner or the parent of a new beginner on this instrument. So the first thing that you're going to notice is that I've moved myself down onto the floor. This is really important. This instrument, it's very easy to have the instinct to open it on your lap. It's a very bad idea. It can come tumbling out really easily onto the floor, and it's made of a wood that can easily crack, especially if it hits a hard floor below. I don't even recommend opening it on a table. It's just not worth it. We have young students who are going to need a little extra help and monitoring while they first open these instruments and get used to handling them. And having it up on an elevated surface is just asking for it to fall down and hit the ground. And that's something that we really want to avoid. Most violin cases are going to function almost identically to this one. They're not all going to be the same. The shapes of the buckles might be different. Some of them might be zippers, actually. I can't know exactly what kind of a case you're going to get for your violin, and you're going to have to do a certain amount of figuring out how to open it on your own, but I will show you with this most common style of case what it looks like to open it up. It's very important that it's laying flat. A lot of times there'll be a logo that's been glued into this little section of the violin case. It should be facing up. The rounded parts of the buckles should be facing up. These little feet that they put on the violin should be facing down. There's a million ways to try and figure out which orientation you should be in, but if you do open it upside down, it's not going to be the end of the world on the first time, and you should just make notes so that you can always open it right side up from there. Simply unlock the buckles, pull down the top, and you are ready to open up the instrument. Okay, the first thing that you should note when you open up this instrument is that in our classes, we do like to go ahead and start with the bow. And the bow is the first thing that I'm going to go over a little bit with you. In order to get the bow out of the case, there's going to be a little twisty, turny thing right here. For most of them, sometimes it functions a little bit differently than the one in this case does. But you're just going to twist that little knob, and it allows you to unlock the bow so that it can be taken out. It's important for you to know that this portion of the bow right here is made of synthetic horsehair. And it's important to touch it as little as possible. We don't want to touch this portion of the bow. If you get your fingers on it a little bit, you haven't ruined it. Don't panic. But we want to touch that as little as possible. It tends to be one of the things that the kids like to experiment around with and touch actually rather a lot. And the more oils from our fingers that we get deposited onto that, the harder it is for it to retain rosin, the more it's going to get that same oil onto the strings of our instrument, which will then rust. And so it's really important that we're not touching this. You can actually, by touching it too much, ruin this portion of the bow and have to have it rehaired. All bows eventually will need to be rehaired anyways, but they can last a really long time if you take good care of them. So not touching this part of the bow. The next thing for you to know about with the bow is that this end screw right here is actually going to pull the horsehair tighter when you turn it in a clockwise motion. As I'm turning in a clockwise motion, it's actually pulling this frog back further, and it's tightening the horsehair of the bow. When I turn it in a counterclockwise motion, it's actually possible to turn it so loose that you can see that that synthetic hair is now really flopping around, That's probably too loose, and we don't ever really need it to be exactly this loose. The idea here is that when it goes into storage, it should be loosened. And I'm going to have it basically to the point right before it's all floppy like that. Here, it's pretty loose, but it's not flopping around like crazy. And that's about where I want it to be when it's being stored in the case. When we're getting it ready to be played, though, we're going to try to make it tighter than that. One great trick that I was taught by a fellow teacher is that if you can take on a loose bow and insert a pencil or a Sharpie like this, then as you tighten it up, what's going to happen is it's going to make that stiff and it's going to turn it a little bit. That's when you know it's tight enough. If it's tight enough to hold on to the Sharpie, it's probably tight enough to be played with. I'm going to be showing the students in class. Every bow is a little bit different, and I'm going to be going around and checking bows and showing them this is how tight your bow should be. And that's just part of the routine in the first couple weeks, and so they'll learn the correct tightness for their bow, because every bow is a little bit different. But it's something that we should practice at home and have the general idea of clockwise to tighten, counterclockwise to loosen, and make sure that it always gets stored loose. If it's not stored loose and it just stays tight all the time, then you'll wear out this synthetic horsehair and you'll end up eventually ruining the bow. Really, really important that we make sure that we get in the habit of loosening the bow. If you go into the case once and it's tightened, don't panic. It's not necessarily ruined, but that's a really, really important habit to get into. All right, now that we have the bow tightened, we're going to start actually by adding some rosin to the bow. Rosin is going to come in your case, usually in this pouch at the top, and it usually is in some kind of a container with a cap like this. We can remove that cap, and this is nice fresh rosin. You can see that on this rosin, I used my car key, to scratch and score the rosin a little bit so that as I'm trying to get rosin onto the bow, this is actually gonna make it a little bit easier for that to happen. So I do recommend taking your car key and just gently scoring the top of the rosin like this. The bows that they send are usually not even close to having enough rosin on them to begin playing the instrument. So if you can get this piece done for us at home, this is going to save us an enormous amount of time in school. All of our violin, violas, cellos, and basses are going to come in with fully naked bows, no rosin at all on them. And what you need to do in order to get this bow ready to play is to take the bow and draw it across that scored rosin. And you can see sometimes I'm focusing on one area that is really, really not have enough rosin, and I'm going back and forth, and sometimes I'm taking nice long strokes like this. At the beginning, when you first get your bow out of the case, it might take as much as 5 or 10, maybe even more minutes of rosining these bows in order to get enough rosin on them to really be ready to play. So if you can imagine us having to do that for every single student in class, it's wild. I'll sometimes be teaching class while getting a bow rosined up like this. Okay, everybody, it's time to begin the next song. Go! I'm still rosining the bow the entire class. I do try to get to school early and stay after a little bit late at the beginning of the school year here to help get these things ready. But if you can help us rosin these bows up like this at the beginning of the year, it is going to make a massive difference in getting everybody ready to go and be on the same page at the beginning of the school year. Now, this particular bow has actually been rosined for our instrument demonstration days, and it's probably more than ready now. It was needing maybe a bit more. Once you've done that first 10-ish minute run of getting rosin really, really on the bow, and it is very, very firmly and clearly grabbing the strings, really, really clearly grabbing them, when you're in that state, you're going to still rosin the bow every single time you play, but you're not going to need to do as much every single time you play. When you take your instrument out for the first time, you're going to tighten the bow and you're going to go back and forth maybe 10 times. And 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, 8, 9, 10. You've gone 10 times across the bow, and now you have enough rosin. And you shouldn't need to stop in the middle of the playing session to get up and go rosin your bow. You did that as a part of getting prepared, and now you can just sit down with the class and play. In rare cases, you're going to notice, oh no, I really do need some more rosin, and then you got to stand up and do that in class. But if we got enough on it at home, and we do it right before we begin playing in class, then we're ready to go. Taking the violin itself out of the case is extremely straightforward. I always hold it with my left hand because my right hand is my bow hand and my left hand is the one that holds the violin. And so I like to hold it from this part right here, just a nice firm grip around the body. And now we'll get up into our chair and show you how to hold it properly to play. All right, we got our violin out and ready to go. Let's talk about playing position. Again, I like to have my left hand here on the left side of the violin. And when I'm in rest position, I'll just rest it on my knee like this, or I'll tuck it under my right arm like this. These are both the best rest positions. It's important that we're not touching the strings a bunch. It's really important that we're not touching the bridge, that we're not touching the tailpiece, that we're not touching the tuning pegs. The more we touch all these really sensitive parts of the instrument, the more likely we are to knock it out of tune and make it kind of impossible for us to play correctly with the rest of class. And so that's why I'm grabbing around the body of the violin, and when I have it in rest position, I'm sort of tucking in a way where I'm not touching all the rest of this stuff up here. I'm just grabbing again on the body of the violin like this. The bow itself can just rest on your lap. I would highly recommend against leaning it up on a stand. When you put it up on a stand, people walk by and knock it off. They're pretty sensitive, and so like if it drops on the floor, you probably haven't ruined it. But if it drops on the floor many times, one of them is going to cause problems. All right, now there is one more bit that I would like to talk about before we begin playing the instrument, and that is the shoulder rest. Shoulder rests are a really important component for strings players, for beginners especially. Holding the instrument in the correct position is just incredibly important, and these kinds of shoulder rests make it a lot easier to do so. So this one costs around $15. I think it is absolutely totally worth investing in it. They do also make a style of shoulder rest that is really just a piece of shaped foam that you're going to use a rubber band to get held on the bottom of the instrument, and it's going to go up onto your shoulder, and this foam will sit in here to help raise it up and keep it in the proper position. Those are extra handy too, because when you put them into the case, they can just compress into the case. Got to push down a little extra, but that makes it really handy for young beginners who don't have to keep putting it on and taking it off. But these aren't that hard to learn, and once you do get them set up correctly, they make that much more of a difference for you. They're just a much better engineered shoulder rest. So before I fit it on the violin, I want to show you that this curved portion is meant to go on the shoulder like this. It's a good idea to what we might call in construction dry fit it on your shoulder. And make sure that you understand the proper orientation. A lot of students are going to end up with it on here upside down, and that actually makes it kind of more of a hindrance than a help. And so making sure that you know the correct orientation here, and then get the idea that, okay, therefore my violin is going to have to go on like this. And now that we have them lined up correctly, these little rubber feet just go right over the edge of the violin like this. Pretty easy peasy to get that on there like that. Sometimes you have to make adjustments to the shoulder rest from here or from here in order to make the whole thing a little wider or a little bit shorter. But once you get it on there correct, it's very easy to pop on. What this does is it elevates the shoulder instrument up off of your shoulder like this, and it allows it to stay more off to the side. One of the #1 mistakes that we see when we go from rest position, which is what we're really ready for now, when we go from rest position up to playing position, is that students put the instrument kind of in front of themselves like this. They put their chin down onto the chin rest like this, and then their left hand, when their left hand has to try to play the instrument, it has to turn way around like this, and it makes you more prone to compress the wrist up against the neck like this, which is a big no-no. We don't want that. The whole thing is this bad compressed posture that we really, really want to avoid. And the shoulder rest helps a ton with that. It gets it out over here and encourages us to tilt our head to the side onto the instrument like this, and makes it a lot easier to hold in this position. You can even, you know where you're really holding it right when you don't even have to hold on with your hand. I don't actually like to encourage my youngest students to really try that too much. It's just kind of an accident waiting to happen. But when you're stable enough that you can hold the violin like this, then you know you're really holding it properly. And it's a lot easier when you have a shoulder rest on it to do that. So this is the proper shoulder playing position with the instrument off to the side, your head tilted on like this. And when you need to look at your hand to check what's going on, you just turn your eyes, not your whole head. Once you turn your whole head over like this, then it's going to come back to center with you when you center your head to be more comfortable or to look up at the director who's over there. Okay, so always off to the side, and we want to get in the habit of looking down the violin this way and not by turning our head. Now let's talk about bow grip. The proper bow grip with violin is going to be built with your right hand. I get questions about right and left-handedness, You need both hands, and you do need to play in the conventional way. If you try to do it opposite, restringing your violin and all that, you're not going to be able to sit down in an orchestra properly. Your right hand needs to use the bow, your left hand is going to do all of this stuff, and that's the correct way to be doing it. So we're going to be setting this up with your right hand. The thumb is going to go right about here. It's going to make contact with this metal part of the frog. We call this part of the bow the frog. It's going to make contact with this metal part of the frog right here, like this. These two fingers are going to come down opposite, like that. We're going to lean our wrist over onto our pointer finger like this. It's going to be on this rubber rest right here. And the pinky will go up on top of the bow like this. It's a very elegant and delicate hold. If somebody were to come along and try to take it out of my hand, they could just take it right out of my hand. I'm not holding on with a death grip. It's just enough to hold on to it. When your student is building it for the first time, I think it's really important that they stabilize it with their left hand over here, either like this from above or like this. Remember, we want to be avoiding touching that synthetic horsehair when we're doing it. But holding the bow in the left hand to build it with the right can be very helpful. In fact, it can be a good idea to try and build the bow grip from playing position. When you have it stabilized up here on the violin, this is almost the same as holding onto it with your left hand. You can set it here a little bit more rough. You can rough set it up here and then build your bow grip from there. You really want to make your wrist nice and tall, okay? And this is the correct bow grip. Now we're in playing position, we have our bow grip. The next thing to do is to draw the string across the bow. We're going to try and find this lane that's between the fingerboard and the bridge, this empty lane right here, and we're going to be positioned somewhere around the middle of the bow. We don't need to start all the way over here. We don't need to start all the way over here. We're going to start around the middle of the bow, don't overthink it, and we're going to draw in a perpendicular line to the string, perpendicular to the string. We're going to draw across like this. It's a good idea to make a nice long bow stroke like this. A lot of my beginner students are tempted to go little tiny herky-jerky bow strokes, and instead we want to make nice long bow strokes like this. It's important to try to maintain that perpendicular line. You'll notice if you look really carefully that my wrist is going back and forth. My wrist is opening up as I do this down bow stroke in order to maintain that perpendicular line. See, my wrist is pointed up now, and it's pointed down now. Okay, and that helps me maintain a perpendicular line. This is not something that we can expect perfection on, or even like being super close on for our very beginner students. It's a habit that we're going to develop over time. It's like refining your pitch or your shot in basketball. It's like refining a basic athletic skill like that. You're never done. You're never ever done. It's a lifelong journey trying to make it better and more efficient. And so to any extent that we can show them, you want your wrist to be moving like this through the bow stroke in order to keep the bow in a straight line. In order to keep the bow in a straight line, that's great. And just know that it's not always going to come together perfectly at the very beginning. What you're going to see a lot of is this: students starting here and it kind of follows this curved trajectory. Zoom, 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 zoom. And instead, we want to get a straight line trajectory if possible. That's the idea that we want with the basic bowing. You'll notice that I haven't bothered using my left hand yet. I haven't put this up onto the instrument yet because it's just not important for me to start there. It's much more important to start on what we just call the open strings. That means that we haven't pushed down our fingers on the tape anywhere, so we call it an open string. And one of the skills that is important to practice while you're doing this is not only the direction of the bow and the proper bow hold and all that, but also just getting one string at a time. The shape of this bridge is rounded so that I can be at an angle where I'm only getting one string. here that I often am touching two strings at once like I shouldn't be, because my primary instrument is actually the trumpet. And so sometimes I'm accidentally getting when you're getting two strings at once, it's called a double stop, and sometimes it's even desirable. We want to do that, but we want to do it purposefully and not accidentally. And at the beginning, stabilizing the bow stroke so that we can stay on one string and not be going rocking back and forth through the bow stroke is just one of the difficult and important things to master at the very beginning. So we start with that before we even bother with the left hand. All right, now let's chat about the first notes that we're going to play on the violin as a team. We play any sounds at all at first in class, and then once you've gone through a week or two of playing our rhythm games and holding the instruments correctly and everything, we're going to start to try to unify together on a note called concert C. The violin has a tough first note compared to many of the other instruments. The first thing that you're going to need to know is that the left hand is going to have its fingers numbered: 1 for the index finger, 2 for the middle, 3 for the ring, and 4 for the pinky. And we've been playing with the hand here up until now with our bow like this, and now we're going to have to move the left hand out to line up with the neck. You support the violin out here by putting your thumb on the back like this. It's not all the way underneath, but it shouldn't be crammed all the way down into this crevice right here. You stabilize it like this. Remember that it's being held over here by your chin as well, and this is another reason that that shoulder rest can be so helpful. When students first put their left hand out here, the violin is falling down and they feel like they have to hold it like this, and this is a very, very bad position for your wrist to be in to play. So that's another reason for the shoulder rest to be purchased, because it makes a really big difference in getting the left hand correct. It doesn't seem like this over here would affect this out here, but they're very, very, very closely tied to one another. So thumb goes back here. I like to put it between the first and second tape on the instrument like this. That's generally a good spot for it. And then I'm going to be using my third finger, which is my ring finger. On the third piece of tape, we count from the headstock 1, 2, 3, 4 in this direction. So first tape, second tape, third tape, fourth tape. And the first note, C, is third finger, third tape, all the way back over here on this G string. This is where I have to push down on the instrument in order to make the note that we're going to be playing. This is called C. And in class, I'm going to be coming over to violinists, and I'm going to be helping them. I'm going to be grabbing their fingers, and I'm going to be putting it down in the right spot, and I'm going to have to push down a little bit to show them. You really do have to push down on the string. I tell all the students, if it doesn't hurt a little bit when you're pushing down at first, you're probably not doing right. It shouldn't be super painful, but when you first push down on these strings, I'll hold up my finger and I'll show you. You see how there's a little line on my ring finger there? That little line on my ring finger is where the string was pressing down into my finger. It's almost like it's kind of cutting into your finger a little bit. And so it's normal to get that little line on there. After playing enough, you're going to develop calluses on your fingers, and it won't hurt so bad anymore. At the beginning, you might even have to take a break in class and shake out your hands and allow yourself a moment to rest when we get into really heavy playing days. But it's pretty normal for there to be a small threshold of pain that we have to push through while we learn these first notes. So it's third finger, ring finger, third piece of tape, all the way up here on the biggest, fattest string called the G string of the violin. And that means that your fingers have to go all the way across. They have to go, let me see if I can get a good view here. They have to go all the way across over to this string. All the way across over to this string over here. Like this, okay? Once you get that spot held down correctly, is the note that we're going for. You can check that against a piano, C. Third finger, third tape. And now I'm making the note C. It's going to be very common to hear sounds like this. what's happening is I'm not pushing down hard enough with this finger over here. This finger is not pressing down hard enough on the instrument. And because I'm not pushing down hard enough, you're getting that really wispy, almost kind of sick kind of sound. And as I push down hard enough, it allows the string to vibrate. What I'm fundamentally doing when I push down on the string right here is I'm shortening the string. The string is now vibrating from here down to the bridge. Originally, before I'm pressing down, when it's an open string, it vibrates from right here. We call this the nut. That's the official name of this part of the instrument. To the bridge. The string is this long. And now I make the string shorter, and therefore it vibrates faster, and it makes a higher note. So this note is G, and when I put my finger down in that correct spot, I'm holding it all funny to help try to give you a decent view of it. But so I'm shortening the string to turn it into a C. Now I have great news. That takes a while, and other instruments have their own difficulties, and so you've got time to work it out. You've got time to work out how to get your fingers over onto that C properly. Your second note is easy as could be. It's an open string. So I'm actually going to leave my left hand out here on the neck of the instrument in the same exact spot that it was for C, but I'm going to lift my fingers up. I'm going to lift them up. Notice that I'm not having them fly off like this. I don't want them to be completely detached from the neck of the instrument. I'm leaving them pretty close. From this view, it might not even look like I've really lifted them up. It's kind of hard to tell. They're just kind of floating there. Oops. They're just kind of floating there like this. They're just kind of floating there like this, hovering over the tops of the strings, so that they're ready to go back down in case I need to play a C next. But the next note that I'm going to play is this open string right here. This open string right here is called D. You can hear that those two notes are right next to each other. Other instruments have this crazy thing called transposition. They don't even call those C and D. They call them something else. Fortunately, string instruments don't have to put up with that. They're playing C and D. And oftentimes, to unify us in class, what I'll call them is Do and Re. Those are typical ways of kind of unifying it so that I'm saying the same thing to everybody and not having to correct myself for French horns and saxophones and trumpets. But on violin, it's just C and D. Your C, third finger, third tape on the G string. D, the next open string. I pulled my fingers back so you could see it a little bit more clearly that time. But the correct thing to do with your fingers would actually be this. The next note that you're going to need to play is called E. E is first finger, first tape on the D string. First finger, first tape on the D string. The strings in order go G, D, G, D, A, and E. G, D, A, E. And so I'm using the D string. I'm putting my first finger on the D string on the first tape like this. A lot easier than C was to be playing this note. First finger, first tape. I'm peeling my fingers back so that you have a good view, but what your fingers would really look like is like this. Your fingers would look like this, so that they're not out of the way. They might need to press down on another note very soon, so we like to keep them close to the instrument. We don't want them flying off like this. And so the first three notes, third finger, third tape, G string for the C, next string open for D, first finger on that same string for E. C, D, E. And those are the first three notes that we're teaching out of our method book. Strings do have it a little tricky for these first notes, especially the violin. You have a little bit easier setup process than some of the other instruments, and just making the most basic sound on the instrument is fundamentally a little bit more straightforward than a lot of these ones that we have to blow into and do funny things with our face in order to make the sound happen. But this is the point where it does actually get a little extra hard for the violin, is just playing those first couple of notes. The great news is that once you get that down, that actually puts you a lot farther ahead in terms of learning all the next notes. You've already gone across one of the hardest parts that you have to go across, the hardest hurdle to get over. You've already gotten over it, and now learning the rest of the notes, it's just different fingers in different positions up here. And you've already started to learn the positions on the fingerboard, and not just learn them academically, not just learn them like this is finger number 1, but you can feel it. You have memorized the feel in a way where you barely even need to look over there to get your fingers in the right spot. The tapes are there as guidelines so that we can tell you what the different positions are, but pretty quickly you're going to learn what they sound like, and you're going to have a physical muscle memory of what it's supposed to feel like, and you're actually going to spend your time with your eyes over on your music. You'll be looking at your music over here, and you'll be playing and not really paying too much attention to your left hand while you're going through those first bunch of songs in class. So with that, the last bit that we have to talk about is getting the instrument put away properly and making sure that we understand what to do with longer term maintenance of the instrument. Great news for you. Your violin doesn't really need to do anything to be put away. If you have a foam shoulder rest, it can usually just go in the case with that foam rest on it. If it's one of these, yes, of course you have to remove your shoulder rest, but it's as easy as that. You just pop it off. Many of the cases don't have room for this. You can't just jam this into the case. That would be really bad for the violin. So you may need to carry it in a separate bag where you carry your music or something like that. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about how you might store this. Before the instrument goes away, you're going to want to make sure that you wipe it down with a rag of some sort. This is just a little microfiber cloth. It is a great choice. You could use an old sock. It doesn't really matter too much. But you're going to get a large accumulation of rosin on the strings that you want to wipe off. You might see that a lot of white dust has collected on the fingerboard underneath the strings right here. And so you might get your rag in there to wipe underneath the strings as well. You're going to want to wipe off the body of the instrument here. Be very gentle. Remember, this bridge is not glued or screwed or anything into place. It's just being held there by the tension of the strings. So be gentle while you do this, but by wiping off the excess rosin, you'll make sure that not too much builds up over time. And last but most certainly not least, I want to remind you to loosen your bow. It's very important that you take this screw and that you loosen the bow. Remember, we don't want to make it too floppy like this. This is just asking for these hairs to catch on things and get torn off. But we want it to be about as loose as it can be before it's really floppy like that. About as loose as it can be before it's really floppy like that. I actually did unfortunately have one student not loosen their bow enough, and it stretched out this top portion, and it's funny, you could really feel the difference. It's like wearing a shoe that's just way too tight or that's just way too big. You could feel when you're trying to play the instrument that you couldn't get the right type of grip on the strings. You couldn't do any form of advance, like you could make sound, but no actual technique was able to go into it, and so we ended up having to replace his bow. If you forget, if you open the case and you notice the bow is tight, I forgot. I'm sure you haven't ruined it in 1 or 2 times of doing that, but it's a very important habit to establish that we loosen the bow every single time. Same exact thing with wiping it off, like I had mentioned before. You know, if you open it up and you realize, oops, I forgot to wipe it off, don't panic and freak out about it, but do reinforce that that habit is happening. Otherwise, you could run into long-term damage of the instrument. Okay, friends, that is all for the violin. I really appreciate you hanging out for this entire video. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any feedback for things that you think that we should include in this video, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Once again, thank you so much for the time in watching the whole thing. Good luck with it all, and we really look forward to seeing you in class. Bye-bye now.